"Excuse me, young man. This isn't your seat." The words were sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the cabin. Every head turned as the flight attendant's laughter followed, high-pitched and mocking. She glanced at the boy standing in the aisle, his small hands clutching a toy plane as if it were a shield. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some smirked, others pretended not to hear. But the boy couldn't ignore it. His wide grin, the kind only a child could carry, vanished in an instant. His shoulders sank. His eyes, which had been full of wonder only seconds earlier, now flickered with confusion and hurt. The attendant's voice rang louder. "Looks like someone wandered into business class by mistake." She said it as if it were a joke, but no one laughed louder than she did. The boy's lips trembled. He lowered his head, embarrassed, while the uniformed woman turned away smugly, certain she had put him back in his place. What she didn't know, what no one in that cabin realized, was that this child did not belong in economy. And his father, watching silently a few rows away, was the one man she should have never humiliated. The boy's smile had crumbled, and the sting of her words hung heavy in the cabin. Every passenger felt it, but silence ruled the aisle. Some looked away, others shifted uncomfortably, no one daring to intervene. And here's the question for you. If you had been there, would you have spoken up? Would you have defended that child when no one else found the courage? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. And before we uncover the shocking twist that changed everything, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another true story, where injustice collides with justice. Airports had always felt like magic to the boy. The glass walls, the echoing announcements, the endless dance of people heading to faraway places. It was like state-act, peeping into a storybook where every stranger carried a secret adventure. At only 10 years old, he held his father's hand tightly, his small palm warm against the larger one guiding him. In his other hand, he carried a bright blue toy plane, scratched at the edges from years of play. This wasn't just another trip. This was his first time flying business class. He had dreamed of this moment for weeks, asking endless questions about what it would be like. Would the seats recline all the way? Would they serve real food instead of snacks? Could he really watch as many movies as he wanted? His father would chuckle at every question, amused by his son's endless curiosity. The man himself drew little attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, but dressed simply in a soft sweater and dark jeans, he looked like any other traveler who might prefer comfort over display. There was no glittering watch on his wrist, no designer shoes announcing his wealth. He blended into the crowd deliberately, by choice. Those who passed by would never have guessed that this man could purchase the entire aircraft if he wished. What mattered to him wasn't money. It was moments like this, walking side by side with his boy, answering questions, teaching values, showing him the world piece by piece. He believed in humility, in the quiet strength of dignity. His son would grow up knowing compassion first, not privilege. As they moved through the terminal, the boy's eyes darted everywhere. At the shops filled with books and sweets, at the long lines curling toward security, at the planes parked outside like sleeping giants. He tugged on his father's arm. "Dad, do you think our plane is the biggest one out there?" His voice was full of awe, loud enough for a few nearby travelers to smile at his enthusiasm. His father glanced out the window, pretending to study the aircraft before nodding. "It might be, but I know what's even bigger." The boy tilted his head, waiting. "Your imagination. That's the only thing that can really take you anywhere." The boy grinned, hugging his toy plane to his chest as if it had just been promoted to something far more important. At security, his father encouraged him to place the toy gently on the conveyor belt, explaining that even his little airplane had to be checked like everyone else. The boy obeyed, watching nervously as it disappeared into the dark tunnel. Relief washed over his face when it re-emerged safe on the other side. His father chuckled softly, ruffling his curls. Moments like these revealed the innocence that made the child so easy to love. He believed the world was kind, that adults meant well, that strangers could be trusted. His father admired that innocence, but he also knew, someday, his son would discover the world wasn't always fair. He hoped, though, that when that day came, he would be ready to guide him through it. As they approached the gate, the boy's excitement swelled. He hopped on one foot, then the other, humming a tune only he seemed to know. Boarding was called, and together they walked forward, tickets in hand. The father gave a polite smile to the attendant scanning them, while his son proudly showed his boarding pass as if it were a golden ticket. The boy didn't notice the subtle looks from other passengers as they entered the business-class cabin. He was too busy staring at the wide seats and neatly folded blankets, whispering "wow" under his breath. He felt like he was stepping into a dream. But dreams are fragile things, and in only a few minutes his wide-eyed wonder would collide with the harshness of reality. The boy could barely contain himself as he stepped into the wide aisle of business class. He gasped, tugging at his father's arm, pointing at the seats that looked more like cozy recliners than anything he had seen on a plane before. He whispered, as though sharing a secret with the cabin itself, "Dad, they even give you your own little lamp." His eyes shone, the toy plane in his hand momentarily forgotten as he took in the wonder around him. But then, like the snap of a twig in a silent forest, the sound of a laugh cut through his joy. It was sharp, mocking, and it came from a woman in a crisp uniform. She was tall, her blonde hair tied into a perfect knot, her red lipstick unblemished. She stood with her arms crossed, scanning the boarding passengers with an air of authority that tipped easily into arrogance. Her gaze landed squarely on the boy, and that smirk on her face widened. "Well," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "looks like someone wandered into the wrong cabin. Economy is just back there, sweetheart." The boy froze mid-step. His smile withered, and his chest tightened, as if all the air had been sucked out of the cabin. Passengers around them shifted, some letting out nervous chuckles, others glancing away to avoid the uncomfortable scene. The boy looked at his father, seeking reassurance. His father's expression didn't change. Calm, steady, unreadable. He gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder, giving it the kind of reassuring squeeze that only meant, "Don't worry. I'm here." But the attendant wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sir," she said to the father now, "business-class tickets are expensive. We can't just let anyone sit here for show. I'm sure you both would be more comfortable in your assigned seats further back." A faint ripple of laughter stirred again among the passengers. Not cruel, not loud, but complicit all the same. The boy's ears burned. His fingers tightened around the toy plane until his knuckles went pale. He wished he could vanish, wished he could shrink into his seat and hide from every staring eye. His father said nothing. He simply guided his son toward their seats, the calm in his movement striking, almost defiant in its quietness. He sat down without a word, letting his son settle beside him. But the boy felt every glance, every whisper that circled them like a cruel wind. The attendant, unsatisfied, spoke again, her tone harsher this time. "Sir, I'll need to see your tickets once more. Business class has standards, and I wouldn't want you to feel out of place." Her emphasis on those words carried venom. Out of place. Passengers nearby stirred again. A man in a suit cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. A woman in pearls shook her head faintly, her lips pressed tight, as if she disapproved but dared not interfere. Silence was the weapon of the cabin, and it cut the deepest. The boy's father reached calmly into his pocket, pulling out the 2 boarding passes. He handed them over without a word, his face expressionless, his movements deliberate. The attendant took them with a huff, scanning them with exaggerated scrutiny. She squinted, then her smirk returned. "Well, well. Seems legitimate." She handed them back, leaning in closer now, lowering her voice but still loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Though between you and me, sir, some people think buying a seat up here is just about making a show of it, especially when you don't fit the part." Her eyes flicked deliberately to his plain sweater, his casual jeans, his unassuming demeanor. She thought she'd unmasked him, exposed him as someone pretending to belong, and she wanted everyone else to think the same. The boy's chest ached. His throat tightened with shame. He sank deeper into his seat, his toy plane now clutched close to his stomach, as though it could shield him from the stares. The excitement that had filled him moments earlier had drained away, replaced with something new, something heavy. His father, though, remained still. His eyes didn't flare with anger. His mouth didn't spit back a defense. Instead, he placed one hand over his son's and whispered softly, just for him, "Look at me." The boy turned, tears threatening to pool in his eye, as his father's gaze was calm, unshaken, steady as stone. "You don't let the world tell you where you belong," he murmured. "You know where you belong, that's enough." The boy swallowed hard, nodding faintly, though the sting of humiliation clung to him like smoke. The attendant, oblivious to the weight of what she had just done, strutted down the aisle, satisfied that she had reinforced her invisible lines of division. Passengers resumed their quiet murmurs. Some shook their heads as if embarrassed by her conduct, but still, none spoke up. The injustice was raw. A child had been judged not for his behavior, not for his joy, not for his innocence, but for the color of his skin, for the plainness of his father's clothes, for daring to sit in a seat that others thought he didn't deserve. And yet, through it all, the father did not erupt. He did not argue or defend or make a scene. He sat in silence, watching, absorbing, every muscle in his body disciplined. But what no one realized in that moment was that his silence wasn't weakness. It was patience, and his patience would soon become the very thing that turned the skies upside down. The cabin settled into an uneasy calm. The murmurs faded, the clink of buckles fastening echoed through the air, and the hum of engines began to rise beneath the floor. Yet for the boy, everything felt different. Where moments ago the world had seemed bright, filled with wonder, now it felt dim, smaller, as though even the wide seats and soft blankets could not shield him from the sting of humiliation. He sat stiffly, his toy plane resting on his lap like a weight he no longer wanted to hold. His shoulders curled inward, his excitement buried under layers of shame. Every time the attendant walked past, her heels clicking against the carpeted floor, he shrank a little further into his seat. His father noticed. He leaned closer, his voice low, steady, the kind of voice that carried warmth even in the coldest storm. "Sit back, son," he whispered, adjusting the boy's seatbelt gently. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone." The boy's lip quivered. "But she laughed at me. She made everyone look at me like I didn't belong." His father brushed a thumb against his cheek, wiping away the tear before it fell. His eyes, dark and calm, locked onto his son's. "Listen to me. People will always try to measure you by what they see, but their eyes can lie. What matters is what you know about yourself. And I know," he said firmly, his hand resting over the boy's chest. "You belong anywhere your heart takes you." The boy swallowed hard, nodding faintly. His father gave a small smile, then leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes as though nothing had happened. But silence was not surrender. The engines roared, the plane lifted, and the world outside their window shrank into a patchwork of clouds. Passengers adjusted their headrests, some already drifting into sleep, others flipping open laptops or scrolling through in-flight entertainment. The attendant, the same one who had mocked the boy, moved gracefully through the aisle, her expression smug, her smile polite when she spoke to others, sharp when her eyes landed briefly on them. She believed she had won. But the father sat perfectly still, every breath measured, his posture relaxed in a way that belied the storm beneath the surface. He had said nothing, not one word of defense, not one raised voice. To the casual observer, he was simply a man too timid to fight back, too docile to confront insult. Yet beneath his calm exterior, wheels were turning. Midway through the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed and passengers settled into the rhythm of the journey, he reached slowly into his bag. His movements were deliberate, almost unremarkable, so quiet that not even his son noticed at first. He pulled out his phone, the soft glow of the screen illuminating his composed face. The boy glanced sideways, curious. His father tapped gently, his finger, precise, confident. He wasn't scrolling, wasn't idly checking messages. He was composing something. A few words, no more than a single sentence. His son leaned closer, but his father tilted the screen away, keeping the message private. The boy whispered, "What are you doing, Dad?" His father turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Just making sure people remember what respect means." The boy blinked, puzzled. He couldn't imagine how a simple text could fix what had just happened. But his father pressed send, locked the screen, and slipped the phone back into his bag without another word. To the child, it looked like nothing. To everyone else in the cabin, it seemed like nothing. But that one message, short, calm, deliberate, was enough to send ripples far beyond the pressurized walls of the plane. Minutes later, somewhere far away, a phone vibrated. A notification lit up a screen in a corner office that overlooked a city skyline. Then another, in the pocket of a manager seated comfortably in his own home. Then another, flashing across the desk of a corporate executive sipping coffee in a glass-walled boardroom. One message, one chain reaction, and none of the passengers sipping their wine or dozing in their reclined seats had any idea of the storm quietly gathering above their heads. Back in the cabin, the boy leaned against his father's arm, still weighed down by the sting of humiliation. His father, however, wore an expression of serene patience, as if he knew something no one else did. His breathing was steady, his eyes closed, but behind the calm exterior was the quiet confidence of a man who understood the weight of his own name. The attendant strolled past again, offering wine to the passengers in the row ahead. She didn't even glance at the boy this time. To her, the incident was over, forgotten, but she had no idea that every step she took, Oak was carrying her closer to a reckoning. Hours stretched on, the cabin filled with the low hum of engines and the occasional clink of cutlery. To the boy, the flight felt endless, every minute spent wondering if anyone else had seen what he had endured, if anyone else cared. His father did not speak of it again. He simply rested, calm, composed, as though he could wait forever. But beneath the surface, time was counting down. Somewhere on the ground, phones were ringing. Emails were being typed in haste. Policies were being reviewed. And at 30,000 feet, the boy's father sat silently, his son leaning against him, while a storm brewed far beyond the sight of anyone in that cabin. The boy could not know it yet, but his father's silence was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence before the storm. And when it broke, the skies would never feel the same again. The wheels touched down with a shudder, the engines roaring as the plane slowed across the runway. Passengers stirred awake, gathering belongings, stretching stiff limbs, murmuring about the weather outside or the meetings ahead. To them, it was just another landing. But for one man, and for one boy still holding a worn toy plane, this arrival meant far more. The father glanced at his son, who was now half asleep against his arm. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certainty in his gaze, as though every second of patience had been measured and accounted for. The storm he had summoned was waiting just beyond the gate. The attendant walked briskly through the aisle, her smile polite again as she directed passengers to remain seated until the seatbelt sign turned off. She moved with the same confidence as before, her heels clicking, her posture sharp. In her mind, she had restored order long ago. Whatever small humiliation she had inflicted would fade into nothing. After all, she thought, who would believe or remember a child's discomfort? But as the plane rolled toward its designated gate, something shifted. Out the window, figurees, res were waiting, not just the usual ground crew, but men in tailored suits, women with lanyards and clipboards, and several security officers standing at attention. They weren't here for the passengers in business class or for the weary travelers in economy. Their eyes were fixed on one man, the boy's father. The seatbelt sign flicked off with a chime, and passengers began unbuckling, stretching, reaching for bags. But before the line could form in the aisle, an announcement came over the intercom. The voice of the captain, measured but faintly nervous. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated momentarily. There will be a brief delay as we prepare for a special passenger disembarkation. Thank you for your patience." Confused murmurs rippled through the cabin. Heads turned, brows furrowed. Who could possibly warrant such treatment? And then the doors opened. The executives stepped inside, their polished shoes clicking against the floor, their faces a mixture of formality and unease. At the center of the group was a man in a dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his demeanor respectful, yet urgent. He walked down the aisle with purpose until he stopped directly at row 5. "Sir," he said, bowing his head slightly, "we're honored to have you with us today. On behalf of the airline and the board, welcome back. We apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Passengers craned their necks, eyes wide, whispers buzzing through the air like static. They glanced at the casually dressed man in the sweater, the same man who had been mocked, dismissed, quietly enduring the sting of insult. Could it be? The attendant stood frozen at the front of the cabin, her painted smile collapsing into disbelief. The executive continued, his tone reverent. "Transportation is waiting for you on the tarmac. The chairman has been informed. If there's anything at all we can do to make this right, please let us know." The father inclined his head in a quiet nod, speaking for the first time with a voice calm, deliberate, carrying weight far beyond its volume. "Thank you. My son and I will disembark now." He rose smoothly, helping his boy gather the small toy plane, slipping the strap of his bag over his shoulder. He moved without arrogance, without flourish, as though this attention meant nothing to him. Yet to everyone watching, the shift in power was undeniable. Passengers whispered fiercely now, their voices low but urgent. "Who is he? Did you hear? They said the chairman knows him. Wait, doesn't he own part of the airline?" Speculation swirled, each whisper sharper than the last. And then, the truth settled among them like a heavy curtain. This was not just any man. This was a billionaire mogul, a name etched into industries spanning finance, technology, and aviation itself, a man whose influence reached the boardrooms of the very company that employed the flight attendant. The boy clung to his father's hand, confused by the sudden attention. He tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Dad, why are all these people looking at you like that?" His father bent low, his voice soft, reassuring. "Because sometimes, son, the world only sees what it wants to see, until it's reminded who really holds the keys." At the front of the cabin, the attendant's face drained of color. Her earlier smirk, her mocking tone, her cruel laughter, all of it replayed in her mind like a haunting echo. She had laughed at a child whose father could buy and sell the company that paid her wages. She had humiliated the son of a man whose name could alter careers with a single word. She tried to compose herself, straightening her shoulders, forcing a smile, but her hands trembled as she gripped the service cart for support. The father walked past her without so much as a glance. His silence spoke louder than any insult could have. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was dismissal. She was beneath his attention, irrelevant in the shadow of his authority. And that dismissal crushed her more than fury ever could. The executives followed closely behind as he and his son exited the plane, disappearing into the jet bridge where cameras flashed discreetly and staff bowed in hurried respect. The cabin buzzed with shock, disbelief, awe. One passenger muttered under his breath, "I can't believe it. The flight attendant laughed at him. She has no idea what she's done." The woman in pearls who had remained silent earlier now whispered to her neighbor, "I thought he looked ordinary." And that's the point, isn't it? People think they can measure worth by appearances, but true power doesn't need to dress up. The balance of power had flipped. In a single moment, the man who'd been mocked was revealed to be the one holding the strings, the one with the silent ability to change destinies. And as the passengers collected their things, still whispering, one truth became undeniable. The attendant's laughter would not be remembered as a joke. It would be remembered as the mistake that cost her everything. Because when the silence broke, it revealed not just the father's identity, but the devastating weight of who he truly was. The jet bridge was a corridor of whispers. Executives walked in tight formation, speaking in hushed tones as the father and his son were escorted through. Behind them, the cabin crew filed out slowly, their nerves frayed, the weight of realization crashing down with every step. The boy's father never raised his voice, never demanded apologies. He didn't need to. The power of his silence had already reshaped the atmosphere. By the time his feet touched the polished floor of the terminal, the airline's chain of command had already been set into motion. In a near, Irby conference room, hastily prepared with folders and tense managers, the air thickened with urgency. Word had travelled faster than luggage on the conveyor belt. This was not simply about an incident in business class anymore. This was about survival. The airline's leadership knew that one man's goodwill, or his quiet disapproval, could shift their stock prices, unravel partnerships, even topple careers. The father entered not as an angry customer, but as a presence no one dared ignore. The CEO of the airline's parent company had already been briefed. Emails marked urgent had flooded executives' inboxes. Apologies were drafted, revised, and finalized within the hour. Meanwhile, the flight attendant stood apart. Her once confident posture collapsed into nervous fidgeting. Her uniform, crisp just hours ago, now felt suffocating, like a costume that betrayed her. She replayed every word she had said. The laughter, the smirk, the condescension, as if each syllable were a stone dragging her down. The humiliation she had poured onto a child now returned to her magnified, echoing louder with every glance cast her way. "Please step inside," one of the managers said curtly, gesturing to the room. She walked in, her heels no longer clicking with pride, but with hesitation, each step heavier than the last. The boy's father sat calmly at the far end, his son beside him, the toy plane still in his hands. Around the table, executives and HR officers arranged their papers like weapons. The lead manager spoke, his tone sharp and businesslike. "Your conduct on this flight has been reported and verified by multiple passengers. We take such matters with utmost seriousness, especially given the circumstances." The attendant swallowed hard, her throat dry. I didn't mean—" Her words faltered. Excuses, once easy, dissolved in the gravity of the moment. The manager didn't allow her to finish. "Regardless of intention, your actions violated our standards of professionalism and decency. Effective immediately, your contract is terminated." The witty. Ardiez fell like a gavel. No appeal, no negotiation. Her career with the airline ended in less than a minute. She gasped, her eyes wide, her hands trembling as she clutched the back of a chair for support. The world that had once felt stable beneath her had crumbled. She had laughed at a boy. She had mocked a man she thought powerless. And now, she was being stripped of the uniform that had given her that false authority. The boy's father never spoke. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to command justice. The humiliation that had been forced upon his son was being answered, not with rage, but with the quiet, crushing weight of accountability. But the punishment didn't end in that room. Within hours, passengers who had recorded the incident began posting their videos online. The mocking laugh, the words dripping with condescension, the boy's innocent confusion. It spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Headlines appeared almost instantly. Flight attendant humiliates child in business class. Airline scrambles after incident with billionaire passenger. Discrimination at 30,000 feet. The outrage was fierce and unrelenting. Thousands of voices condemned the cruelty, demanding better training, demanding consequences. Hashtags trended. News anchors replayed the footage. Analysts debated the culture of customer service, and activists pointed to the deeper truths beneath the surface. For the attendant, anonymity vanished overnight. Strangers recognized her face, her smirk, her uniform. Where once she had laughed in arrogance, now she was haunted by her own image replaying endlessly on screens across the world. The shame she had dealt to a child was magnified 1,000-fold, reflected back through the lens of public judgment. The airline issued a formal apology before the day was done. The statement was polished but desperate, a clear attempt was to stem the tide. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on Flight 227. The behavior displayed by a member of our cabin crew was unacceptable and does not reflect our values. We have taken immediate action to address the matter, including termination of the employee involved. We remain committed to ensuring respect and dignity for all passengers." Yet everyone knew this apology wasn't born from principle. It was born from necessity, because behind those words, behind the careful phrasing, lay the unspoken truth. They could not afford to lose the goodwill of the man who owned more of their future than their balance sheets could admit. Back in the terminal, the boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, did she get in trouble?" His father looked down, his expression softening. He nodded once. "Actions have consequences, son. Always." The boy was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "But you didn't even yell." The father placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You don't need to raise your voice when the truth speaks for itself." As they walked away from the terminal, surrounded by respectful silence, the contrast could not have been clearer. The woman who had once laughed stood alone, stripped of her authority, her career undone by her own arrogance. And the man she mocked walked forward with his son, not triumphant but steady, teaching him the quiet power of dignity. The fallout was swift, merciless, and complete. The airline moved quickly to protect its reputation. The attendant vanished from their ranks, and the world, watching, saw more than just a viral story. They saw a lesson written in the skies. The humiliation of innocence will always echo back, louder than it was given. And this time, the echo shattered everything. The house was quiet that evening, the hum of the city beyond their windows softened by distance. The boy sat at the kitchen table, his toy plane resting before him, its wings scratched from years of play. He traced a finger along the edge of the wing, his mind still heavy with the day's events. His father poured 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of him before taking a seat across the table. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence was gentle now. Not the silence of humiliation, but of understanding waiting to be spoken. Finally the boy asked, his voice small, "Dad, why didn't you get mad at her?" Why didn't you yell?" The father leaned forward, his eyes steady, his tone calm but full of meaning. "Because true power doesn't need to shout. Anger burns fast, son. It flares up and disappears. But dignity lasts. And patience." He paused, letting the word linger. "Patience has a way of revealing the truth in time." The boy listened intently, the lesson settling into his heart like ink on paper. His father's hand reached across the table, resting gently on his. "The world will sometimes try to tell you where you don't belong, but you must remember, your worth is never decided by their laughter or their ignorance. It is decided by how you carry yourself, even when no one believes in you." The boy nodded, his young face etched with newfound seriousness. In his eyes, the pain of the humiliation was giving way to something stronger, understanding. Later, as the boy drifted off to sleep, the father stood quietly in the doorway, watching his chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of dreams. He knew the lesson had taken root, and though today's wound had stung, it would heal into strength that no insult could erase. The story does not end with the downfall of one flight attendant or the shame of an airline. It ends with a truth that belongs to all of us. Discrimination can happen anywhere, to anyone. But silence in the moment does not always mean weakness. Sometimes the quietest response carries the loudest consequences. Respect, humility, and dignity. These are the wings that carry us further than arrogance ever could. And when the storm passes, what remains is not the cruelty of others, but the strength we showed in enduring it. That is the lesson the boy learned, and that is the lesson we are all called to remember.